during an era, during a moment that I realized much later had simply been wasted. I caught a glimpse of the endless futility in all my efforts. During an instant when I saw a fleeting outline of what might have mattered, there appeared the lasting realization of my own eternal worthlessness. During the war, I lost my bearings, but still kept on obeying every single order. I saw myself from afar, committing those endless acts of horror. During an interval in which life forced me to stop and think, besides you, I found but little that I could truly count on. During that time when I might as well have been underwater, I saw the surface from below, and it was bright with hazy detail. During the flash, I was not sure if I saw it last or had just been blinded. Then came the worry that I had never really known the difference. During an era where I crawled from the baking mud to the steaming swamp, I often look back with fondness upon that clear blue sea. During a meeting to which I sat as if in deepest torpor, I saw myself actually permit them to bleed my short time away. During my recovery, I realized how often I had almost died, so I tried on other futures in front of that newly illuminated mirror. During a sunrise in which I found that I was tired through and through, I look forward to yet another evening without rest. During the long trip, all of my normal routines were broken down, and slowly I realized how little else there was left inside of me. During the springtime, as I became older, there came the knowledge that I grew more slowly every year. During a dream, I convinced myself to no longer be so sure of all those things I was seeing when I thought I was awake. During my illness, I finally had the opportunity to ponder. At last I was cured, but my time to act had come and gone. During my short trip, there was so much new to see. Arriving back home, my eyes quickly closed up once more. During the morning, a bird song captured my attention. I was quite aware for a moment, then fell back dully into normalcy. During a lifetime spent always looking forward to now forgotten events, abruptly came the instant that would have to last me forever. During my trial, I made up no new lies, but parroted the adopted truth of others as an armor of my own. During the time that the sun grew ever hotter, the sandbanks grew too warm to shelter my clutch of eggs. During the snowstorm, things were perfectly clear. Then came the next day, and once again, I was no longer quite sure. In the light before the dawn, it seemed as if things could actually make sense, and slowly everything dissolved back into dusty chaos beneath the hot sun. During the stage where I was forced into thinking I could not sleep, mercifully it was decreed that I should not have to be so alive forever. During the executive speeches, I felt an alienation tinged with ennui. Returning to my cubicle, I redonned a simple but protective cynicism. During the excitement, I saw the expression of the pitchmen. After the sale, both parties were trained as if by hot sex. During the future, things always seem to go faster than before. Luckily, the past is not exactly what it once used to be anymore. During this moment, I tried hard merely to pause. I had planned so long for this instant, but it was gone in a flash. During these thoughts, both of our minds wandered off. Now you stray farther, taking some part of me with you. During that period in my personal devolution, I helped emit photons, which must travel on forever through space. During a particularly comatose and vegetative recreational interlude, I felt I was partially restored by emitting CO2 to make manly noise. During my blindness, my hearing became quite acute. I heard you smiling as we lay in each other's arms, quite still. During a hibernation from critical thinking, I slept walk with all the others. Like most, I was never called upon to actually awaken. During the war, only simple thoughts of our home could sustain us. Meanwhile, we strove to exterminate just those things that belonged to our enemies. During an epoch in which I browsed the floating plants of the pond, there came the notion that things might not be quite what they seemed. During a commercial, I merely glanced at the time and then went quite blank. Later in hospital, I wished I might have thought to do something better. During a beating, there was no ambiguity. Then came the might-haves, would-haves, should-haves, and could-haves. During that instant, as I flew through the air, I thought perhaps there awaited a transcendent moment. During the full moon, many things moved around. At that time, it was easy for me to scuttle happily about, quite unnoticed. During the celebration of that final great victory over our enemies, I was struck by surprise at how little we knew of them. During our briefing, I noted the officials appeared quite cheerful and optimistic, up-tempo despite the obvious and unstated facts, quite to the contrary. During the monsoon, as I was watching everything wash away, I saw at last the wisdom in this new way of life. During years of study, I realized how much smaller my knowledge became. I grew more and more wary of all those who prattle on so very glibly. During the night, I was awakened by some terrible unknown inaction. I lay for hours uneasy, and then came a merciful unconsciousness. During my so-called career, I was silent, with pretext of professionalism, yet no voices were raised against the many petty, backbiting, lazy suck-ups. During the end of anesthesia, I remember swimming ever upward. I was trying very hard to hold my breath to the surface, far above. During the time when the icicles grew longer by the day, we worried over the pale sun as it kept getting darker, earlier every evening. During early June, we knew things would always keep getting better. I was convinced I was never meant to grow old like my father. During my last years, I tried to remember what I had always wanted. Finally, it seemed I was merely waiting for the last thing I would recall. During the epidemic, I helped gather children's bodies. Soon they began to wave to me from all their grotesque positions. During my first prison sentence, I learned from the real masters of crime. Back on the street, I vowed never to be apprehended again. During some party function, the vodka finally got the best of me. 3 days later, I began that long train ride east in a cattle car. During her flight from the conflict, she often slept in untended barns. To get a bath, she might well have to bargain her wretched self. During his trial, the old women hissed and spat. Fatherless children looked on the court for some explanation. During the bombings, we huddled and the blood came from our ears. Later, we saw that our only drinking well had been destroyed. During the long march, they lost all contact with their homes. Thusly, was it easier for them to burn distant villages to the ground. During his lifetime, our great leader always pointed out the proper way. Without his strict guidance, we quickly fell upon each other. During the fire, it grew dark and the smoke tinged all of our thoughts. Reports from far away hinted at a vast destruction. During my pregnancy, I was raped and then kicked by the partisans. Later, they returned and left me toothless, but with child once again. During the hottest part of the day, I could find no hope as I toiled. When the merciful clouds brought gentle breezes, I felt spiritually uplifted. During my lifetime, I always tried to imagine those billions of years, but in the end, my 70 still seemed like a very large part of forever. During my father's slow passing, we stood carefully, forehead to forehead, as if after long headbutting, we might at last depart in peace.